As the member for Barton just spoke in this place of these terrible murderous events, the sad truth is they are not isolated incidents. They have happened on just so many occasions. And before question time and taking this indulgence today, as we reflect in particular on the terrible crime that was committed against Hannah Clarke and her children earlier, Leanna and Trey, we also speak of the terrible murders of so many others. Mothers and children. Murder. It's what it is. Murder that again, last Thursday, shocked our country. When Jenny and I spoke about it, we just couldn't get our heads around it, as I'm sure is the case for every single parent, and it doesn't matter whether you're a parent or not, you can't imagine it. It is just too horrible to contemplate. The act itself, and that someone could perpetrate that act, particularly as a father, it is incomprehensible. An act of such depravity that only makes you ask, how does such evil happen in our land? To the Clarke family, all of us here extend our sympathies and our love. But I must wonder if that could ever be enough to cover the profound grief. They have shown incredible resilience and character in the worst of all possible circumstances. As best as we can, we also send the country's love to you. In your grief, you have every right to be angry, furious, because everything we've done across this country to protect women and children didn't protect Hannah and her children from this evil. I believe state and territory and national governments, all of us, our agencies and importantly the judiciary, we must all reflect again on these terrible murders. We must reflect on how and where the system failed Hannah and her children as it has failed so many others. It's so frustrating. It's so devastating. Whilst this was the action of a depraved and evil man, we know enough of the circumstances leading up to the murders to know this should not have happened, and there will rightly be an inquest in Queensland, and I commend the Queensland Government for taking that action as they should. It will speak the truth, I have no doubt, as so many others have spoken the truth. And we already know this: Hannah deserved to feel safe and be safe, and to watch her joyous and wonderful children grow up. And earlier, and Leanna and Trey deserved to have a childhood that was innocent and to have lives that were long and joyous. For most of us in this chamber, I'm saying for all of us, the words family violence just jar. Saying those two words together, they should never be together. They have nothing to do with each other. Quite the opposite. Because our families should be the safest place in all of the world, particularly for our kids. But sadly, all too often, they are not. We know that, as hard as it is to believe. One woman is killed every 9 days by a partner or a former partner. 1 in 6 Australian women have experienced physical or sexual violence by a current or former partner since the age of 15. We know these figures. We've spoken these figures I don't know how many times in this place, regardless of who've sat on this side of the chamber or on that side of the chamber. We know these figures, or on what side of the chamber or the other side of the chamber in every state parliament in this country. Every 2 minutes somewhere in the country, police are called out to a domestic violence incident. And as members, we know the Commonwealth and the states and territories, we do work closely on tackling violence against women and children. And we must continue to do this together. This has been, I think, one of the shining lights of bipartisanship in this chamber and in so many chambers around our country. I acknowledge the work as I have done and others have done on the establishment of the first action plan under the National Plan to Reduce Violence Against Women and Their Children from 2010 to 2022 that was commenced under the Rudd and Gillard governments. That was a great initiative. Now, as part of the fourth action plan, that spirit continues, that partnership continues, a partnership that exists not just across this aisle, which is closed by our commitment to addressing this, but between the state and territory governments and the Commonwealth as well. A record $340 million has been provided under this plan for frontline services to protect and support women and children. In total, since 2013, some $840 million has been committed to addressing domestic and family violence, carrying on the work that was initiated by the previous Labor government. In August last year, COAG agreed to the fourth action plan. In November, we released the National Implementation Plan. It includes funding for prevention strategies and frontline services, including for groups which needed additional support, funding for safe spaces, as well as funding for 1-800-RESPECT. And that 1-800-RESPECT line is open 24 hours to support people impacted by sexual assault, domestic or family violence and abuse. And COAG comes together in a few weeks' time. This will once again be on our agenda. But it is a time for us all to reflect. But to reflect together. There are never any excuses. There are none. Or justifications for the evil that Hannah and her children experienced. Never. Not under any circumstances. With the states and territories and together as a parliament, we will continue to work together to translate these words that I'm sure the Leader of the Opposition will also state with the same passion into actions and changes that make a real difference for women and children. Mr. Speaker, a violent crime, the murder that sought to deny a woman her voice and her future. Let me read one of Hannah's last Instagram posts, which expressed a hope. She wrote, "I'm a strong woman." No doubt she was. "I don't sit around feeling sorry for myself, nor will I ever let anyone mistreat me again. I am a survivor, not a victim. I am in control of my life and there is nothing I can't achieve. My girls will grow up being strong women who understand their worth." This hope was crushed when Hannah and her children were murdered. We must work together, as we have been, and for as long as it takes, to restore that hope to those we know right now, today in this country, are living in exactly the same danger as Hannah and her children.
The Leader of the Opposition.
I thank the Prime Minister for not just his words, but no doubt his sincere commitment to do something about this, along with the rest of this Parliament. The murders of Hannah Clarke and her children, Aaliyah, Leanna and Trey, have shaken us to the core. Yet again, a woman has lost her life to a former male partner. Yet again, children robbed of their futures by a father who betrayed what should have been the most powerful bond of all between a parent and their child. We cannot let their shocking and horrific end be their whole story. We must hold on to their names, hold on to the image of those four faces so happy because they were with each other. The courage that Hannah showed. As the Prime Minister said, she left. That takes courage. She took her kids to what she thought was safety, only to find that that wasn't the case. That a man who had a record of crime, because it is a crime, against his own family, conducted the ultimate crime, and in a manner which, quite frankly, is just beyond comprehension, really. It's just difficult to just understand how that could possibly occur. Our hearts also go out to the bystanders and the first responders who tried to help but who found themselves powerlessness. One of those sisters, of course, ended up with injuries themselves. On Wednesday morning, I was in Brisbane, and Terry Butler, the member for Griffith, the local member, rang me up about this before the news broke, because I was giving a speech at the media club and didn't want to be, caught out. And I actually had we had a much longer conversation than you would expect, because it was difficult to comprehend the sheer horror of what had happened. Our sympathies are also with the family and friends of Hannah, Aaliyah, Leanna and Trey. They are grieving in the worst of circumstances, and they are showing incredible resilience under those circumstances. We were, of course, shaken again just days later when, in the early hours of Saturday morning, a woman in Townsville was stabbed to death in her home. Once again, we heard that most dreadful but all too familiar line that police were treating it as a domestic violence incident. We must confront the awful truth that this is an epidemic, that on average 1 woman a week is murdered by her current or former partner. That all of us in this place know people who are directly impacted by this, many people, that these women are our mothers, our sisters, our neighbours, our aunts, our cousins, people we have contact with, members of our political parties, members of parliament, nurses. Everyone is affected by this scourge. Violence and abuse against women exists in many forms: physical, emotional, financial. We cannot be mere bystanders. We shouldn't keep relearning the same lesson, that evil happens when good people do nothing. Last May, I suggested a national summit. I know there's been meetings such as that in the past, and I do think it is worth consideration. It's put forward not in a political way, in a spirit in which it's intended, and the Prime Minister indicates he's taking it. Is it time once again to use just the extent of this horrific act to get through that we need to listen to those people who are impacted by family violence and to the experts. We need to learn. We desperately need to act. I do want to say that I think that we need to repel some of the attacks as well. We need to speak up when people make the sort of comments, including in the aftermath of this tragedy, that were entirely inappropriate. We must repel attacks on the Family Court of Australia. The existence of a standalone specialist family court is a Labor legacy that we will defend. Whatever problems there are with the current family law system, the existence of a standalone specialist family court is not one of them. It is a necessary part of the solution. Government and opposition can work together on this. All of us as members of Parliament have a role to play. The memory of Hannah Clarke, her 3 beautiful children, must galvanise us all into further action to eliminate violence against women and children. We can't accept this as normal. We have it in us to be so much better. Lives depend on it, as we see all too often. I did write to you, Mr Speaker, and spoke to you earlier today about the need for the Parliament to acknowledge this, and I thank the Prime Minister for the way that he has conducted the capacity of us as a Parliament. I do think it would be appropriate that we acknowledge, as I wrote to you, in the normal way that we do, the fact that this Parliament stands as one in respect for Hannah and her girls, and Aaliyah, Leanna and Trey, her 3 beautiful children. And I think that, let's hope, let us just hope that in years to come that there's a Prime Minister standing on that side of the aisle and a Leader of the Opposition on this side of the aisle who give very different speeches about how we've been through a considerable period of time without there being a murder, a fatality. And that is truly an objective worth each and every one of us working towards each and every day in whatever capacity we have.
As a mark of respect, I ask all present to rise in their places. I thank the House.
I thank the Senate. Mr President, last Thursday our nation was shocked by a crime so terrible that it is difficult for most of us to comprehend how it could possibly have happened. Hannah Clarke and her children, Aaliyah, 6, Leanna, 4, and Trey, 3, were murdered on a street in Brisbane. They died at the hands of an evil man, a man they should not have had to fear. Hannah's estranged husband and the father of those beautiful children. We ask as a nation, how could anyone do such a thing to the ones he should love? And we ask, why could Hannah and her children not be protected? These questions and more will have to be dealt with in an inquest in Queensland which will seek to reveal the truth behind this horrific crime. For now, our nation wraps its arms around the family of Hannah Clarke. We say to the Clarke family today that we are with you in your grief. Tears have been shed all over our nation for Hannah and her children. All Australians have felt the pain of this horrific crime and support you. We convey to you our love and the sympathies of everyone here in this place, reflecting the love and sympathy from all the Australian people. We hope you can take some comfort in the fact that as a community and as a nation, we embrace you at this incredibly difficult time. You as a family must have so many emotions. You must be asking yourself so many questions. And if you are angry and feel let down by the system, you have every right to feel that way. Governments and authorities across this country have done so much to try to protect the victims of domestic violence, but Hannah and her children were not protected when they should have been. Right across governments, law enforcement agencies and the judiciary, we must ask ourselves, how can we do better? We must not let Hannah and her children's deaths be in vain. We must learn from this and move to protect other women and children who find themselves in similar situations. The figures, Mr. President, are too terrible to ignore. One woman is killed every 9 days by a partner or a former partner. 1 in 6 Australian women have experienced physical or sexual violence by a current or former partner since the age of 15. And every 2 minutes, somewhere in our country, police are called out to a domestic violence incident. The Commonwealth and the States have worked closely together on trying to tackle this violence. This has very much been a bipartisan initiative, and we acknowledge the work to establish the first action plan under the National Plan to reduce violence against women and their children between 2010 and 2022 commenced under the Rudd and Gillard governments. Now, as part of the fourth action plan, the Commonwealth is investing $340 million for frontline service to protect and support women and children. In total, since 2013, the Commonwealth has committed $840 million to address domestic and family violence. And yet, we face this. In August last year, COAG agreed to the fourth action plan. In November, we released the National Implementation Plan. It includes funding for prevention strategies and frontline services, including for groups which need additional support, funding for safe spaces, as well as funding for 1800 Respect. 1800 Respect is open 24 hours to support people impacted by sexual assault, domestic or family violence and abuse. We will continue to work together to fight against this evil in our community. But, Mr. President, today we remember Hannah and her children and grieve with her family. Those beautiful faces we have all seen in those pictures will drive us to do better.
Senator Wong. Thank you, Mr. President. I also seek leave to make a statement. Mr. President, the murders of Hannah Clarke and her children, Aaliyah, Leanna and Trey, have shaken us all to the core. Like many, I couldn't read the reports when they first came in because they were too distressing. Like many, I think we held our children closer. The reports, the news, what happened was devastatingly awful. It was tragic, incomprehensible. We ask ourselves, why does this keep happening? But it does. As Senator Cormann said, a woman a week in this country murdered by a current or former partner. 1 in 3 experiencing physical violence from the time they're 15, 1 in 5 sexual violence. This was a horrific event, and we grieve for Hannah Clarke and her 3 children. We join with people across the nation in expressing our grief and sorrow and support for the family. And we extend this to many other victims and survivors of family violence in Australia. But actually it shouldn't be a shock to us that this has happened to yet another woman and her family. We shouldn't be shocked there's been another murder. In the early hours of Saturday morning, a woman in Townsville was stabbed to death in her home. Again, a case of family violence. So we can't continue to simply be shocked. We ought to resolve to act. We ought to resolve to end the national emergency of family violence. So let this event, let this tragic, senseless murder of a woman and her children be a catalyst for change. Changes in approach from governments, but also changes in attitudes in our communities. As Our Watch said in response to the Campbell tragedy, no one individual, community, organisation or government can prevent violence against women alone. They said, in order to prevent violence against women, we need a shared, consistent and mutually reinforcing approach, where all levels of government, business and the community contribute to creating a safer Australia built upon respect and equality. The right of women and children to live safely in their homes, in their communities without fear, mustn't be compromised. And in this place, all of us, individually and collectively, have a responsibility to lead and to work together to provide support to women escaping violent and abusive relationships. So I support Anthony Albanese's call for a national summit because we need to come together to listen to survivors and experts. We need to listen and to act, and we all have a role to play. So on this day, why don't we commit to doing more than being shocked? Why don't we commit to really working together for change? We mourn, but let's do more than mourn. Let us all act together to eliminate violence against women. This is what the memory of this family and so many others deserve.
Senator Waters.
Thank you very much, President. The Greens send our deepest condolences to Hannah Clarke's family for the loss of Hannah and her 3 gorgeous little kids, Aaliyah, Liana and Trey. This act of violence, this murder, has shaken not just my hometown of Brisbane, but it's shaken the nation. The violent killing of women and children by the people that are supposed to love them is inexcusable. Hannah did everything that she was supposed to do. She left. She filed for a domestic violence order against her ex-partner. She sought help. But this was not enough. The system didn't protect her and her family. They were killed while awaiting a hearing for that breach of domestic violence order. We will always remember Hannah, along with the 8 other women that have been murdered this year, and the 61 women that were murdered last year, and all of the other women that have lost their lives in the past. Too many lives have been ended because our government has not done enough to end the systemic and cultural factors that lead some men to believe that they are entitled to control their partner and their children. I and my colleagues pledge to do everything we can to ensure that domestic violence prevention, support and crisis services are properly funded and resourced so that we can finally see an end to this national security crisis. And I hope that the victim blaming that we've seen in some of the media outlets and sadly from the mouths of some people in this chamber will cease.
Senator McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr President. The National Party associates itself with the comments made by Senator Cormann and extends our deep condolences to family and friends of Hannah Clarke as the tragedy visited on that young family in Queensland last week, I think, has shocked us all to the very core. 3 beautiful children and their mother horrifically killed by the man whose job it was to protect them, to provide for them, to love them, to see them to grow and develop over time. It was horrific and shocking. Families are an institution that exists to nurture children, to provide a deep, loving, stable environment for their growth and development, for deep, loving relationships between 2 adults to extend for a lifetime, and to see a family, they're not places for fear, for disrespect and for violence to be visited on innocent women and children at any time. Domestic violence has no place in Australia. That is why our government has taken strong steps in partnership with state governments to address this. But we must do better. We must do better for the future children, sons and daughters of Australia. So our deepest sympathies to the families and friends, and looking forward to working with everyone in this chamber to ending this scourge.
Senator Hanson.
I seek leave to make a short statement.
Leave is granted, Senator Hanson.
We witnessed the ultimate act of betrayal this week. A separated father of 3, Rowan Baxter, doused his children and former wife in fuel before setting them alight. As the flames engulfed the car, killing them all, Rowan Baxter committed suicide. A calculated, callous, cowardly and evil act that has left so many Australians incapable of comprehension. His disgusting action has further added fuel to an already twisted and difficult family law debate that has seen many decent men deprived of their parental rights. Like so many Australians, I am so angry at the selfish motivation he has shown. Please do not let this bastard's actions reflect on all men.
Senator Griff.
Look, I too seek leave to make a short statement.
Leave is granted.
Look, I also rise to join the chorus of moving tributes to Hannah Clarke and her beloved and beautiful children, Leah, Leanna and Trey. I and my Centre Alliance colleagues give heartfelt condolences to the Clarke family. Lloyd, Suzanne and Nat have lost a remarkable daughter and sister and their precious grandchildren, nieces and nephew. The unspeakable murder of Hannah Clarke and her young children has left the nation reeling. We are all in shock over what has happened. Hannah Clarke did nothing wrong, not a thing. She dreamt of starting a new life after making the courageous decision to leave a violent and abusive man who sought to control and dominate all aspects of her life. She had every right to be free. Hannah has been described by her brother Nat as trying her best to bring joy to all those around her and only ever wanting the very best for her children. Photos of Hannah and her children laughing and playing actually break my heart. Their freedom was short-lived. There is absolutely no justification for these senseless murders, none. It was a senseless act by a monster. Hannah and her children will be remembered were remembered in a vigil last night in Brisbane where thousands of mourners came dressed in pink, Hannah's favourite colour, to pay their respects to such an amazing woman and her precious little children. Life will never be the same for the Clarke family. The grace and dignity the Clarke family has shown in such difficult circumstances is how we should all be carrying ourselves. Hannah and her children have touched the hearts of all Australians, and we pledge your deaths will not be in vain.
I ask senators join in a moment of silence as a mark of commemoration. I thank the Senate.